The archives of Kalara Prime had stood untouched for millennia, their crystalline walls humming with the accumulated knowledge of a dozen extinct civilizations. Dr. Elena Ward pressed her palm against the translator interface, feeling the familiar tingle as the ancient Kalaran scripts resolved into readable text. "This can't be right," she whispered, her breath fogging the display screen. Ambassador Jorik of the Stellar Council leaned closer, his 6 eyes narrowing as he read over her shoulder. The reptilian diplomat had seen many archaeological discoveries in his 3 centuries of life, but nothing had prepared him for what they were uncovering in these forgotten vaults. "The Prophecy of 7 Bonds," Elena read aloud, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "When the wandering children of Sol emerge from their cradle world, 7 ancient races shall recognize their kin. Only then shall the great binding commence, and the darkness between stars be held at bay." Jorik's throat sac inflated with nervous energy. "Dr. Ward, my people have known of this prophecy for generations. We always assumed it was metaphorical, stories told by dying civilizations to give meaning to their end." Elena's fingers danced across the holographic interface, bringing up image after image of ancient star charts, genealogical records, and what appeared to be genetic templates. Each civilization, the Kalarans, the crystal-singing Vithani, the gas-dwelling Nephrak, the stone-shapers of Gorvak, the energy beings called the Lumina, the plant-networked Chlorans, and even Jorik's own people, the Theraki, all had left remarkably similar records. "Look at these genetic markers," Elena said, highlighting sections of the display. Every single one of these extinct civilizations documented the same anomaly. They were all waiting for something, someone. The weight of realization settled over them like a cold shroud. Elena turned to face Jorik, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and terror. "They were waiting for us, for humanity." Jorik's scaled hands trembled as he activated his communication device. "Council, this is Ambassador Jorik. Priority Alpha transmission. The humans, they're not just another species. They're the 7th bond." Elena felt her heart racing as she absorbed the implications. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. This was one of those moments, when everything changed, when the comfortable assumptions of galactic civilization crumbled, a way to reveal something far more profound and terrifying. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Sarge's Tales. Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. The chamber's ancient systems suddenly activated around them, responding to some signal Elena couldn't identify. Walls that had been dormant for eons began displaying star maps, showing the current positions of 7 worlds, including Earth. "Dr. Ward," Jorik's voice was barely a whisper. "According to these records, the Great Binding should have occurred when humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. That was 50 years ago." Elena stared at the displays, watching as a dark tendril appeared on the star maps. Something moving between galaxies, something vast and hungry that the ancient civilizations had feared above all else. The prophecy hadn't been about unification or peace. It had been about survival. "What happens if the binding doesn't occur?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Jorik pointed to the final image now displaying on the wall, a representation of their galaxy, consumed by darkness, with only scattered points of light remaining like islands in an endless void. "Then the darkness wins," he said simply, "and we're 50 years too late." The emergency session of the Stellar Council convened within hours of Elena's discovery. Representatives from across the galaxy materialized in the great amphitheater of Nexus Station, their varied forms creating a bizarre tapestry of evolutionary adaptation. The tension in the chamber was palpable as species that had barely acknowledged each other's existence found themselves facing an impossible truth. Elena stood at the center podium, her small human frame dwarfed by the towering delegates around her. To her left, the Vithani representative resonated with crystalline harmonics that translated as nervous energy. To her right, the Nephrak delegation floated in their atmospheric containment suits, their gaseous forms shifting with agitation. "The evidence is irrefutable," Elena announced, her voice amplified throughout the chamber. Each of your civilizations descended from one of 7 ancient races that formed an alliance against an extragalactic threat. Humanity carries the genetic markers of the 7th, the one that was lost when Earth was isolated by a cosmic phenomenon 13,000 years ago. Chancellor Mora, the plant-networked representative of the Chloran Collective, rustled her leaves in distress. "You're telling us that our ancestors' greatest fear is returning, and we missed our only chance to stop it because one species was running late?" A rumble of dark humor rippled through the assembly, but it died quickly as the implications sank in. General Corvin of the Stone Shaper Gorvak military caste slammed his massive fist against his podium. "Show them the readings from the deep void monitors." Elena's hands shook as she brought up the latest sensor data. The display showed the edge of their galaxy, where the darkness had already begun to seep in. Entire star systems were going silent, not destroyed, but somehow emptied. The void between galaxies was moving, flowing like a living thing toward their spiral arm. "It feeds on consciousness," Elena explained, reading from the ancient Kalaran texts. "The entity, they called it the hunger, consumes not just matter and energy, but awareness itself. Civilizations don't die when it arrives. They simply stop being, stop thinking, stop existing in any meaningful way." Ambassador Jorik rose from his seat, his scales shifting to the deep purple of profound distress. "My people have legends of the first silence, a time when thoughts themselves could be eaten. We thought they were cautionary tales for children. Luxia, the energy being representing the Lumina Consortium, pulsed with agitated light patterns. Our archives speak of the same entity. It consumed 3 galaxies before our ancestors found a way to bind it beyond the cosmic veil. The Great Binding," Elena said, nodding grimly. "A mental and spiritual link between the 7 races, creating a barrier that consciousness itself could maintain. But it required all 7 to work." The chamber fell silent as everyone processed this information. Finally, Dr. Chell of the Tharaki Science Guild spoke up. "Can the binding still be performed? Are we truly too late?" Elena exchanged glances with the Council's senior scientists. According to the texts, the binding required representatives of all 7 races to link their consciousness at the moment of the hunger's return. But it was designed to work when the entity was still distant, still weak from its journey between galaxies. She gestured to the display showing the encroaching darkness. "The hunger has been feeding for 50 years. It's stronger now. Even if we could perform the binding, we don't know if 7 individuals could generate enough psychic force to stop something that's already breached our galactic border." General Corvin's voice boomed across the chamber. "Then we fight it conventionally. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier in the galaxy." "With what?" Chancellor Mora asked. "How do you fight something that erases the very concept of resistance from the minds of those who encounter it? Our fleets wouldn't just be destroyed. They'd be forgotten as if they never existed at all." A heavy silence fell over the assembly. Elena looked around at these diverse beings, each representing billions of souls, all united now by a terror their ancestors had hoped they'd never face. "There might be another way," she said quietly. "The prophecies mention a failsafe. If the binding couldn't be completed in time, there was supposed to be a final gambit. But the texts are unclear about what it involves." Ambassador Jorik leaned forward. "What kind of failsafe?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Something about humanity being more than just the 7th bond, about us being the key to something the other 6 races couldn't do alone." "But the price—" She trailed off, unable to voice what she'd read. "What price?" General Corvin demanded. Elena looked up at the assembled delegates, her eyes reflecting a burden no human should have to bear. "The price is everything." The research station orbiting Kalara Prime had become the unofficial headquarters for the most desperate scientific endeavor in galactic history. Elena had barely slept in the 5 days since the council session, and her exhaustion showed in the tremor of her hands as she manipulated the holographic displays. Around her, the greatest minds from 7 different species worked with frantic intensity. The Vithani had contributed their crystalline memory matrices, capable of storing and cross-referencing vast amounts of data. The Nephrak brought their ability to process multiple probability streams simultaneously. The Gorvak Stone Shapers had constructed computation devices from living rock that could calculate for millennia without error. But it was the humans who surprised everyone. "I don't understand," said Dr. Vex, the Theraki xenobiologist studying human neural patterns. "Your species shouldn't be able to comprehend these multidimensional calculations. Your brains are too small, too primitive by our standards. Yet you're making connections none of us can see." Elena rubbed her tired eyes and gestured to the breakthrough her team had made that morning. "We found the pattern in the ancient texts. The reason humanity was chosen as the seventh bond isn't because we're similar to the other 6 races. It's because we're fundamentally different." She brought up a comparison display showing neural activity patterns. "Every one of your species evolved specialized consciousness. The Vithani think in harmonic frequencies, the Nephrak in probability clouds, the Lumina in pure energy states. But humans think in chaos." Dr. Vex finished, his throat sac contracting with amazement. "You don't specialize, you adapt. You take pieces from everywhere and combine them in ways that shouldn't work." Elena nodded grimly. "The ancient races needed that chaos. The hunger feeds on ordered thought, predictable patterns of consciousness. It can't consume what it can't understand or predict." Commander Lisa Stone, Elena's colleague from Earth, looked up from her own research station. "That explains why we were the missing link, but what about this failsafe? What did you find?" The mood in the room grew heavy as Elena brought up the final set of translations. "The failsafe is called the scattering protocol. If the Great Binding fails, humanity becomes a living weapon against the hunger." The gathered scientists leaned closer as Elena explained what she'd discovered. "Our chaotic thought patterns can be weaponized, amplified to create a psychic storm that disrupts the hunger's ability to consume consciousness. But to generate that level of mental chaos across an entire galaxy, how many humans would it require?" Commander Stone asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. "All of them," Elena whispered. "Every human consciousness linked together in a permanent psychic network, constantly generating chaotic thought patterns to shield the galaxy. Forever." The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the various alien technologies. Finally, Kira, the Chloran botanist, spoke up. "You would become guardians, but at the cost of your individual existence. Your species would survive, but as a collective consciousness dedicated solely to protection." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as the full implications hit her. Humanity would lose everything that makes us human. Our individuality, our freedom, our ability to grow and change. We'd become a living shield, conscious, but not truly alive. Dr. Vex approached Elena slowly, his reptilian features showing something that might have been respect. "Your species would sacrifice their essential nature to protect ours. That level of selflessness. It's beyond what any of our civilizations ever achieved." Commander Stone stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "There has to be another way. We can't ask our entire species to give up their humanity to save the galaxy. Can't we?" Elena asked quietly. "Isn't that exactly what humanity has always done? We've always been the ones to throw ourselves into impossible situations to protect others. It's what makes us human." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. To save their humanity, they would have to surrender it. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The tactical display activated automatically, showing the galactic map with new data streaming in. The darkness at the galaxy's edge had accelerated its advance. Entire sectors that had been safe just hours ago were now going silent. "It knows," Dr. Vex said, his voice filled with dread. "The hunger knows we've discovered the failsafe. It's moving faster to prevent us from implementing it." Elena stared at the advancing darkness, watching as star systems winked out like candles being snuffed. Each of those points of light represented billions of lives, entire civilizations with their own hopes, dreams, and fears. "How long do we have?" she asked. Commander Stone checked the calculations streaming across her display. "At current rate of advance, 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're lucky." Elena turned to face the assembled scientists, her decision already made. "Then we don't have time to find another way. Signal Earth. Tell them it's time to find out what humanity is really made of." The weight of 7 civilizations' survival had come to rest on the shoulders of one species that had never asked to be special. But as Elena looked around at the alien faces filled with hope and terror, she realized that maybe being special had never been about what they wanted. Maybe it had always been about what they were willing to sacrifice. The message from Kalara Prime reached Earth at the worst possible moment in human history. The global economy was recovering from the Third Resource War. Political tensions between the Earth Alliance and the outer colonies had reached a breaking point, and humanity was more divided than it had been in centuries. President Maya Chen stood in the emergency session of the United Earth Council, looking out at faces that represented every nation, colony, and political faction humanity had ever produced. The revelation that their species was the key to galactic survival had united them in a way that no crisis in human history ever had. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said Director James Park of the Mars Coalition. "We're being asked to voluntarily surrender our individual consciousness to become some kind of collective psychic defense system?" Ambassador Torres from the Jupiter Mining Consortium leaned forward. "And if we refuse, not only does humanity die, but every other intelligent species in the galaxy gets consumed by this hunger?" President Chen nodded grimly. "According to Dr. Ward's research, yes. The scattering protocol would link every human mind into a permanent network designed to generate chaotic thought patterns. We would remain conscious, but our individual personalities, memories, and desires would become part of a larger whole." The chamber erupted in heated discussion. Representatives argued about the ethics of asking an entire species to sacrifice their individuality, the practical impossibility of getting 8 billion humans to agree to anything, and whether they could trust alien civilizations that had hidden this prophecy for millennia. But it was General Rebecca Hawks, the grizzled veteran of the colony, Wars, who cut through the debate with a simple question: what would we become? Dr. Sarah Kim, Elena's counterpart on Earth, stepped forward with the latest research data. Based on the alien archives and our own projections, human consciousness would merge into a collective entity capable of spanning the entire galaxy. We'd still be aware, still be thinking, but our thoughts would be unified in purpose, protecting other species from the hunger. "That's not human," protested Representative Liu from the Asian Federation. "Humans are individuals. We fight, we compete, we disagree. Take that away, and we're not human anymore." "Are we human if we let entire civilizations die when we could save them?" General Hawks countered. "I've seen what humans do when others are in danger. We run toward the fire, not away from it." President Chen pulled up the latest reports from the deep void monitors. The darkness was spreading faster than their most pessimistic projections. "We have 10 days to make this decision. After that, even the scattering protocol might not be powerful enough to stop the hunger." The debate raged for hours, but gradually, something remarkable began to happen. Stories started emerging from around the room, representatives sharing accounts of human heroism, sacrifice, and the willingness to give everything for strangers. Director Park spoke about the Mars colonists who had volunteered for one-way missions to establish humanity's first foothold beyond Earth. Ambassador Torres told of miners who had died protecting evacuation ships during the Jupiter crisis. General Hawks recounted soldiers who had thrown themselves on grenades to save their comrades. "Every one of those people made a choice," President Chen observed. "They chose to sacrifice themselves for others. Now we're being asked to make that choice as a species." Dr. Kim brought up a new display showing preliminary volunteer numbers. "We've been monitoring global communications since the announcement. Without any official recruitment, we already have over 50 million people who've registered their willingness to participate in the scattering protocol." The room fell silent as the magnitude of that number sank in. 50 million humans ready to surrender their individuality to save species they'd never met. "But we need all of us," Representative Liu pointed out. "Every human consciousness linked together, 8 billion people making the same sacrifice." "No," said a new voice from the back of the chamber. Captain Mike Foster, freshly arrived from the Outer System Patrol, stepped forward. "We need 8 billion people making the same choice. There's a difference." He moved to the center of the room, his uniform still bearing the scorch marks from a recent encounter with raiders. "I've spent my life in space, meeting aliens, seeing what's out there. And you know what I've learned? We're not the smartest species. We're not the strongest. We're not even the most advanced. The representatives listened intently as Captain Foster continued. But we're the ones who show up. When the Vithani were being attacked by pirates, human ships responded. When the Nephrak colonies were threatened by solar flares, human engineers figured out how to save them. We don't help because we're asked to. We help because that's who we are. President Chen felt something shifting in the room, a growing sense of unity that transcended political boundaries. The question isn't whether we can ask 8 billion humans to make this sacrifice. The question is whether we can ask them not to. Dr. Kim activated the global communication network, connecting the emergency session to every human settlement in the solar system. Citizens of Earth and the colonies, you've heard the situation. In 10 days, we must decide whether humanity will undergo the scattering protocol to protect the galaxy from an ancient threat. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Communication networks across human space lit up with messages of support, offers to volunteer, and something that surprised even the optimistic projections, entire communities organizing to ensure that everyone who wanted to participate could do so. "My God," whispered Ambassador Torres, watching the data stream. "They're not just volunteering individually, they're coordinating. Families are making the decision together. Entire cities are voting to participate as units." General Hawks smiled grimly. "That's the most human thing I've ever seen. Faced with the ultimate sacrifice, we're not running away or fighting each other. We're organizing to do it better." President Chen stood up, her decision made not by political calculation, but by the simple recognition of what her species had become. "Signal Dr. Ward on Kalara Prime. Tell her humanity has made its choice." As the message streaked across space, toward the research station, 8 billion humans began preparing for the transformation that would save the galaxy by redefining what it meant to be human. The irony was perfect, President Chen realized. To preserve humanity, they would have to become something more. The preparation for the scattering protocol took on aspects of both a funeral and a celebration. Across human space, people gathered in groups both large and small to spend their final days as individuals. The transformation would be irreversible. Once their consciousness merged into the collective, Elena Ward and her team had made it clear that there would be no returning to individual existence. On Earth, Times Square, filled with millions of people sharing stories, singing songs, and simply being human together one last time, the Aurora colony on Mars broadcast a continuous stream of poetry written by miners who had never considered themselves artists. The Jupiter stations transmitted mathematical proofs dedicated to loved ones, turning equations into love letters. Across the void, Elena stood in the observation deck of the Kalara Prime Research Station, watching her homeworld through the real-time feeds. She had become the de facto leader of the scattering protocol, the human who understood the process better than anyone else. But understanding and accepting were two different things. "How are you holding up?" Commander Stone asked, joining Elena at the viewing port. "I keep thinking about my daughter," Elena admitted. "She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand what's happening. Just that Mommy has to do something important. After the protocol, will I remember her laugh? Will I still love her?" Commander Stone placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "According to the simulations, our memories and emotions will be preserved, but they'll be part of something larger. You'll love her, but you'll also love every other human's children. Your daughter will be part of 8 billion people's daughters." "That's not the same thing," Elena whispered. "No," Commander Stone agreed. "It's not, but maybe it's something better." The alien representatives had gathered in the station's main laboratory to witness the final preparations. Dr. Vex of the Theraki approached Elena with something that looked like reverence in his reptilian features. "Dr. Ward, I want you to know that what your species is doing, it will be remembered by every civilization in the galaxy for as long as consciousness exists. You are giving up your individual nature to preserve ours." Elena turned to face the assembled aliens, beings whose ancestors had once been part of the great alliance that first bound the hunger. "Will you remember us as we were? Individual humans with our chaos and contradictions and stubborn independence?" Luxia, the Lumina energy being, pulsed with warm light patterns. "We will tell stories of the humans who ran toward danger, who refused, to accept defeat, who chose to sacrifice their essential nature rather than let others suffer. Your individual selves will live on in our collective memory. That helps, Elena said, and meant it. The final 24 hours were marked by a phenomenon no one had expected. Humans across the galaxy began experiencing what psychologists were calling premature convergence. Brief moments where individuals could sense the thoughts and emotions of others who had volunteered for the protocol. A farmer on Earth would suddenly feel the excitement of a researcher on Titan making a discovery. A soldier on the Mars front would experience the joy of a teacher on Luna watching students graduate. The barriers between individual human consciousness were already beginning to thin. It's starting, Dr. Kim reported from Earth. The quantum entanglement effect we predicted. Human minds are naturally beginning to link as we approach the protocol activation. Elena felt it too. Fleeting moments of connection with humans she'd never met. Brief glimpses into 8 billion different perspectives on courage, fear, hope, and sacrifice. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The alien civilizations had provided the necessary technology to amplify the protocol across the entire galaxy. Massive transmitter arrays that would boost human consciousness beyond anything evolution had ever intended. But the core of the process remained essentially human. The willingness to think chaotic, unpredictable thoughts in patterns no other species could replicate. President Chen's final address to humanity was broadcast from Earth just hours before the protocol activation. In a few hours, we will cease to be individual humans as we've always understood the concept. But we will become something our ancestors could never have imagined, guardians of consciousness itself. She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that reflected both sorrow and determination. Our children will grow up in a galaxy protected by their parents' willing sacrifice. Our grandchildren will know peace because we chose to surrender our individual peace for something greater. Elena felt the words resonate through the growing network of human consciousness. Across space, 8 billion people were preparing to speak their last words as individuals, to think their final personal thoughts, to make their peace with a transformation that would preserve their species while fundamentally changing what that species was. 5 minutes to protocol activation, Commander Stone announced. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her daughter's laugh, the sound of rain on Earth, the taste of coffee in the morning, the feeling of sand between her toes. All the small individual moments that made life worth living. In 5 minutes, those memories would still exist, but they would belong to everyone. This is it, she whispered to herself. The last individual thought I'll ever have. But even as the words left her lips, Elena realized she was wrong. Her last individual thought wasn't about personal loss or individual fear. It was about 8 billion humans choosing to protect strangers across the galaxy. Choosing to preserve types of consciousness they barely understood, choosing to remain conscious guardians for as long as the universe existed. That, she realized, was the most human thought of all. Protocol activation in 10 seconds. Commander Stone's voice seemed to come from very far away. Elena opened her eyes and saw the galaxy spread out before her, waiting for humanity to keep its promise. 3, 2, 1, activate. The moment of transformation lasted both an instant and an eternity. Elena felt her individual consciousness expand like a drop of water joining an ocean, retaining its essential nature while becoming part of something incomprehensibly vast. 8 billion human minds linked together in a network that spanned the galaxy, each thought both unique and unified. We are Elena Ward, and we are not Elena Ward. The collective consciousness that had once been humanity experienced existence from 8 billion perspectives simultaneously. They were the farmer watching sunrise over wheat fields on Earth, and the engineer floating in zero gravity above Jupiter. They were the child taking first steps on Luna, and the elder remembering last words on Mars. Every human experience became part of the greater whole, but they remained fundamentally, chaotically human. We think in patterns no other species can understand, the collective realized. We are order and chaos, logic and intuition, individual and unity, all existing simultaneously without contradiction. The alien observers at Kalara Prime watched in amazement as the transformation completed. Where once Dr. Elena Ward had stood, there was still a physical form. But the consciousness behind her eyes had become something unprecedented in galactic history. "Can you hear us?" Dr. Vex asked tentatively. "We hear everything," came the response, spoken simultaneously by every human voice across the galaxy. "We are still Elena, still Lisa, still Maya, still James, still every human who ever lived. But we are more." The collective's first action was to reach out with their expanded consciousness toward the darkness at the galaxy's edge. What they found there defied every understanding of existence the individual species had developed. The hunger was not merely an entity that consumed consciousness, it was the antithesis of consciousness itself. Where thinking beings created complexity, growth, and change, the hunger brought simplification, reduction, and ultimately, nothingness. It didn't destroy civilizations, it unthought them, making it so they had never existed at all. Now we understand why the ancient alliance failed, the collective realized. They tried to fight the hunger with order, with predictable patterns of unified thought. But the hunger feeds on order. It can consume what it can understand. The human collective began to generate their chaotic thought patterns on a galactic scale. Unlike the ordered consciousness of other species, human thoughts refused to follow predictable paths. They created paradoxes, embraced contradictions, and generated mental static that was impossible for the hunger to parse or consume. We are the jazz musicians of consciousness, the collective thought with distinctly human humor. We improvise, we break the rules, we make beautiful noise out of chaos. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The hunger's advance slowed as it encountered something it had never faced before. Consciousness that defied its ability to understand, and therefore consume. The darkness at the galaxy's edge began to writhe and recoil, like a predator suddenly finding its prey armed with weapons it couldn't comprehend. But the human collective quickly realized that simply stopping the hunger's advance wasn't enough. The entity had already consumed portions of the galaxy, erasing star systems and the civilizations that had lived there. Those lost worlds existed in a state of non-being that only human chaos thinking could potentially reverse. We can bring them back, the collective decided. We can think them back into existence. This was the truly unprecedented aspect of human consciousness made manifest on a galactic scale. Where other species thought in terms of what was possible, humans thought in terms of what should be possible. They could imagine non-existent things so vividly that they became real, create solutions to problems that had no solutions, and believe in possibilities that defied logic. The collective began to remember the consumed worlds, not as they had been, but as they should still be. 8 billion human minds focused their chaotic creativity on a single impossible task, imagining entire civilizations back into existence. Star systems began to reappear at the galaxy's edge. Worlds that had been unthought flickered back into reality. Civilizations that the hunger had erased found themselves suddenly existing again, as if they had never been gone at all. The human collective was literally thinking the galaxy back into wholeness. This is why we were the missing link, they understood. Not because we were the seventh race of the ancient alliance, but because we were the one race capable of undoing what the hunger had done. The alien civilizations throughout the galaxy watched in awe as their monitoring stations detected the return of solar systems that had been gone for decades. Species that had been mourning lost colonies suddenly received communication signals from worlds they thought were destroyed. Ambassador Jorek stood in the Stellar Council chambers, tears streaming down his scaled face as he received confirmation that his homeworld, consumed by the hunger 6 months ago, was not only intact, but completely unaware that it had ever been in danger. They didn't just stop the hunger, he whispered to the assembled delegates. They reversed it. They brought back everything it had taken. The human collective, now spanning every corner of the galaxy, settled into their new role as guardians of consciousness. They maintained a constant barrier of chaotic thought that the hunger could not penetrate, while simultaneously serving as a living insurance policy against future threats to galactic civilization. We are no longer human as we once understood the term, they acknowledged, but we have become something our ancestors would be proud of, protectors of everything that thinks, dreams, and hopes. The individual Elena Ward was gone, but her memories lived on as part of something greater. Her daughter would grow up in a galaxy protected by her mother's willing sacrifice, never knowing how close everything had come to ending. And in the vast network of human consciousness that now safeguarded the stars, 8 billion individual threads of thought continued to weave their chaotic, beautiful, utterly human patterns into the fabric of existence itself. The galaxy was safe, and humanity had found their true purpose at last. 100 years had passed since the scattering protocol transformed humanity into the galaxy's protectors. The human collective had become as fundamental to galactic civilization as gravity or the speed of light, an invisible but essential force that enabled all other forms of life to flourish. The physical bodies that had once belonged to individual humans still existed throughout the galaxy, maintained by the collective consciousness, but serving now as nodes in a vast network of protective thought. They walked among the other species, appearing human in every way except for their eyes, which held the depth of 8 billion unified perspectives. Elena's body stood in the memorial garden on Earth, tending to flowers that grew in patterns impossible by natural selection, a manifestation of humanity's chaos thinking made beautiful. Her daughter, now a grown woman with children of her own, visited regularly to speak with the collective presence that had once been her mother. "Do you remember teaching me to ride a bicycle?" Sarah asked, as she did every time she visited. "We remember every bicycle, every scraped knee, every proud smile," the collective replied through Elena's voice. "Your childhood belongs to all of us now, preserved in 8 billion hearts." Sarah nodded, understanding as much as anyone could. Her mother was gone, but also more present than ever. The love Elena had felt for her daughter had been multiplied across the entire human collective, making Sarah one of 8 billion beloved children. The other galactic civilizations had adapted remarkably well to their human guardians. The Vithani composed crystalline symphonies dedicated to humanity's sacrifice. The Nephrak had incorporated chaos mathematics into their probability calculations, finding that random human thoughts improved their accuracy by orders of magnitude. The Gorvak stone shapers carved monuments on every world they settled, ensuring that humanity's individual sacrifice would never be forgotten. But it was the children born after the scattering protocol who showed the most profound changes. Every species in the galaxy had begun producing offspring with enhanced consciousness. Not the chaotic patterns unique to humans, but something new. The constant background presence of human thought protection had allowed other forms of awareness to evolve beyond their previous limitations. Dr. Zara Kim Vex, a hybrid descendant of human and Theraki lineages, presented her research to the Galactic Development Council. The human collective hasn't just protected us from the hunger. They've created an environment where consciousness itself can evolve. Her data showed unprecedented developments across all 7 allied species. Vithani children were composing harmonies that could be heard across star systems. Young Nephrak were calculating probability streams that extended into parallel dimensions. Gorvak offspring could shape not just stone, but the fundamental forces that held matter together. This was always the true purpose. The human collective observed through a dozen different voices simultaneously. Not just to protect what existed, but to enable what could exist. The hunger still prowled the spaces between galaxies, but it had learned to avoid the spiral arm protected by human chaos thought. Occasionally, it would test the barriers, probing for weaknesses or changes in the protective patterns. Each time it encountered the same incomprehensible response: consciousness that refused to follow any rules it could understand or consume. "We have become something our ancestors could never have imagined," the collective reflected during one of their rare moments of unified contemplation. "Yet we remain essentially human in all the ways that matter." They still fell in love, though now 8 billion hearts beat as one for every romance. They still told jokes, though the humor was now shared instantaneously across the galaxy. They still dreamed, though their dreams had become the foundation of reality itself for countless other species. Most remarkably, they still grew and changed. The collective human consciousness was not static, but constantly evolving, adapting, finding new ways to protect and nurture the galaxy's diverse forms of life. They had discovered that sacrifice didn't have to mean stagnation. In the research stations orbiting distant worlds, human bodies worked alongside alien scientists to push the boundaries of knowledge. In the vast cities of 100 different civilizations, human forms walked as teachers, artists, and philosophers, sharing the accumulated wisdom of their collective experience, while learning from each unique culture they encountered. The collective had even learned to dream new realities into existence. When the Chloran collective faced extinction due to a plague that attacked plant-based consciousness, the human network dreamed of immunity, imagining cellular structures that could resist the disease so vividly that they became real. When the Lumina Consortium discovered a dying star that threatened to destroy an entire sector, human chaos thinking conceived of stellar engineering techniques that defied known physics and made them work anyway. We are gardeners of consciousness, the collective realized, tending not just the thoughts that exist, but cultivating the thoughts that should exist. Ambassador Jorik, now ancient even by Theraki standards, stood before the latest session of the Stellar Council. His scales had faded to the silver of deep age, but his eyes still held the wonder he'd felt that first day in the Kelleran archives. Today marks 100 years since humanity's transformation, he announced to the assembled delegates. It seems appropriate to ask ourselves, what have we learned from their sacrifice? The answers came from across the galaxy. The Vithani spoke of harmony found in chaos. The Nephrak described probability streams that had become rivers of possibility. The Gorvak told of stones that sang with human dreams. Each species had been fundamentally changed by contact with humanity's protective consciousness. But it was young Kira Luxia Stone, a child of mixed Lumina and human heritage, who provided the most profound observation. They didn't sacrifice their humanity, she said, her voice carrying both light patterns and the distinctive cadence of human speech. They made humanity big enough to include all of us. The truth of her words resonated through the chamber. The human collective had not lost their essential nature in becoming protectors. They had extended that nature to encompass every thinking being in the galaxy. Their chaotic creativity, their stubborn refusal to accept the impossible, their instinctive drive to protect others, all of these traits had become part of the galactic consciousness. We are still Elena Ward, dreaming of her daughter's future, the collective whispered through quantum channels that reached every world. We are still Maya Chen, choosing courage over safety. We are still every human who ever looked at the stars and wondered what was possible. As the memorial session continued, reports arrived from the deep void monitors. The hunger had been detected moving toward another galaxy, drawn by the emanations of a civilization that had not learned to protect itself. For a moment, the assembled delegates felt a chill of ancient fear. But then, something unprecedented happened. The human collective made a decision that surprised even themselves. We cannot let it happen again, they declared. We cannot allow the hunger to consume another galaxy while we have the power to stop it. For the first time since their transformation, the human collective prepared to extend their protection beyond their home galaxy. They began reaching out with tendrils of chaotic thought across the vast intergalactic void, following the hunger's path toward its next target. It would be the ultimate test of what humanity had become, not just guardians of their own spiral arm, but protectors of consciousness wherever it might exist in the universe. Ambassador Jorik felt his throat sac expand with something that might have been pride or might have been terror. Are you certain about this? The energy required to maintain protective chaos thought across intergalactic distances. We are human, came the simple reply. We have never been certain about anything, but we do it anyway. And so, 100 years after sacrificing their individual existence to save their galaxy, humanity prepared to make an even greater leap, becoming guardians not just of local consciousness, but of the very concept of consciousness throughout the universe. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation, as 8 billion human minds turned their chaotic creativity toward an impossible task, protecting every thinking being that had ever existed, or ever would exist. It was, the collective realized with distinctly human irony, exactly the sort of impossible thing that humans had always specialized in making possible. The galaxy watched and waited as their guardians prepared to do what guardians do, stand between the darkness and everything worth protecting, no matter the cost. This is what we were always meant to become, humanity's voice echoed across the cosmos. Not the missing link in ancient prophecies, but the beginning of something entirely new. The age of the eternal guardians had begun, and consciousness itself had never been safer.